Sergeant William Evans is one of those figures who lingers at the edges of history, present but rarely illuminated. Despite spending nearly 2 years with the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment's Easy Company as its first sergeant, he remains largely overlooked. Unlike many of the men around him, his story was only lightly touched upon by Stephen Ambrose in Band of Brothers, and even then, only in passing. Part of that silence may have stemmed from Evans' close working relationship with Captain Herbert Sobel, a man whose leadership style made him deeply unpopular. Because of that association, and perhaps because of how others remembered him, Evans never became a central voice in the story of Easy Company. Even Richard Winters, whose perspective shaped much of the narrative, left little behind about him. What does survive are fragments, small, telling moments that hint at the kind of man Evans was and how he was perceived. One such incident unfolded during training at Camp McCall. In a nighttime exercise meant to test alertness, Evans and Sobel attempted to sneak in and confiscate the rifles of Easy Company while the men slept. Instead, disoriented in the dark, they wandered into the wrong area and took weapons from F Company. Believing they had succeeded, they began berating the supposed Easy Company soldiers for their failure to secure their gear, only to be interrupted by a group of confused and increasingly irritated F Company men, led by their commander, demanding to know why their rifles had disappeared. The humiliation was immediate and complete, exposing both officers to ridicule. Long before these moments, Evans' story had begun far from the mud and tension of military training grounds. He was born on July 21, 1910, in San Antonio, Texas, and grew up in a world far removed from war. Evans attended St. Thomas High School in Houston before enrolling at Texas A&M University, where he studied petroleum production engineering. By the time war loomed on the horizon, Evans had settled into civilian life, working as an accountant for the Todd Houston Shipbuilding Corporation. His job granted him a deferment from military service, a chance to remain safe while others were called to fight. But Evans chose otherwise. With brothers who had families of their own, he stepped forward voluntarily, enlisting so they would not have to go in his place. He went further still, volunteering for the paratroopers, a path known for its difficulty and danger, and was assigned to Easy Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. After completing jump training at Fort Benning, he rose to the position of Company First Sergeant. It was a role that demanded discipline, authority, and the respect of the enlisted men. Evans, however, struggled to secure the latter. His alignment with Sobel placed him at odds with many in the company, and while tensions with Sobel eventually boiled over into the well-known NCO mutiny, Evans stood apart from it. Though aware of the plans led by Sergeants Mike Ranney and Terrence Harris, he did not join them. In dramatizations like Band of Brothers, Evans is often portrayed as little more than Sobel's obedient subordinate, a man lacking both initiative and insight. There is some basis in reality for parts of that portrayal. He did, for example, deliver the typed ultimatum to Winters regarding punishment or court-martial after the latrine incident. He was also likely present during the infamous fence-cutting episode involving George Luce impersonating a superior officer. Still, such portrayals capture only a narrow slice of a much more complicated individual. Among the men who served alongside him, opinions about Evans varied, though many were critical. Darrell Powers, known as Shifty, remembered him as broadly unpopular. Others, however, saw something different. When Sergeant Leo Boyle married in England, Evans stood beside him as best man. Gordon Carson considered him a friend. These glimpses suggest a man capable of loyalty and connection, even if those qualities were not widely recognized. The most vivid account of Evans comes from Donald Malarkey, whose memory painted a far harsher picture. According to Malarkey, Evans could be even more difficult than Sobel, pushing the men relentlessly, and in his view, perhaps even encouraging Sobel's severity. In April 1944, as Easy Company trained in England, Malarkey fell ill with a worsening sinus infection brought on by the damp, cold climate. What began as a manageable condition soon escalated. Trips to sickbay yielded little more than aspirin, and with no improvement, he took matters into his own hands, traveling to London with his friend Tom Burgess in search of proper treatment. The journey was agony. By the time they arrived, Malarkey was in severe pain, his ears throbbing with a pressure that reminded him of childhood illnesses, but far worse. At a nearby Army medical facility, a doctor examined him and quickly realized the seriousness of the situation. His fever had climbed dangerously high, and immediate treatment was necessary. Burgess was ordered out, and Malarkey was given strong medication including penicillin. That night, he awoke to find blood soaking his pillow, draining from his ears and nose. By morning, the decision had been made to transfer him to a larger facility, the U.S. Army 1st General Hospital in St. Albans. Before leaving, he entrusted Burgess with his money and a simple request: inform First Sergeant Evans and the company officers of what had happened. At the hospital, Malarkey's condition was treated aggressively. Doctors warned him that had he waited any longer, the infection might have reached his brain. For 2 weeks he endured constant treatment, receiving massive doses of penicillin. Eventually he recovered, but not without consequence. A colonel overseeing his care warned him that, given his history and condition, he had no business continuing as a paratrooper. He could be reassigned, grounded permanently. For Malarkey, the thought was devastating. After enduring the brutal training and forging bonds with his fellow soldiers, the idea of being removed from the airborne felt unbearable. He pleaded his case, insisting he was willing to accept the risks. Reluctantly, the doctor agreed to give him a chance. If he passed a final test, he could return. He did pass, but returning to Easy Company brought a new challenge. As he made his way back, a fellow soldier casually remarked that he'd been thought absent without leave. The comment struck him immediately. Had Burgess failed to deliver the message? The answer came quickly. Standing before Evans, Malarkey was met not with understanding but hostility. Evans demanded to know where he had been, accusing him of going AWOL. Even when presented with hospital discharge papers, Evans dismissed them, refusing to listen. Malarkey tried to explain, insisting that Burgess could confirm everything. But Evans rejected that too, claiming Burgess had lied to protect him. The confrontation escalated, with Evans threatening court-martial. Then, abruptly, the tension broke. From the adjoining office, First Lieutenant Thomas Meehan, who had replaced Sobel, intervened, summoning Evans away. When Evans returned, whatever authority he had carried into the room seemed diminished. He dismissed Malarkey without another word. But Malarkey wasn't finished. Still burning with anger, he seized a nearby prophylactic from a supply box and tossed it toward Evans with a biting remark before walking out. It was a small act of defiance, but one that captured the strained relationship between Evans and many of the men he oversaw. Not long after, the war moved from preparation to reality. On D-Day, Evans boarded a plane as part of Stick 66, alongside Lieutenant Meehan and the rest of Easy Company's headquarters section. As they approached Normandy, the aircraft was struck by German anti-aircraft fire. It crashed in a field near Saint-Mère-Église, killing all aboard. In the chaos that followed, Evans was initially listed as missing in action. Leadership within Easy Company shifted quickly. Staff Sergeant James Punchydeal stepped in as acting first sergeant, and later, when he was promoted and transferred, Carwood Lipton was chosen by Winters to take over the role. Evans' story ended there, in a field far from home. His remains were eventually returned to the United States and laid to rest at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery. Decades later, a farmer near the crash site discovered one of his dog tags, a small, enduring trace of a man who had once been part of something larger than himself. In the end, William Evans remains an elusive figure, neither hero nor villain in any simple sense, but a man shaped by circumstance, remembered through fragments, and defined as much by the perspectives of others as by his own actions.